All right, hello, and welcome back to the Broken Business Models podcast. We're your hosts, Ryan and James. And before we get into today's podcast, just a quick disclaimer how we start each of these. Nothing in this podcast or any of our other materials should be taken as investment advice. James and I could have positions in any of the stocks we may mention today, and we reserve the right to change those positions at any time, with or without notice. So make sure to always do your own work and consult with a professional before making any investment decision. With that being said, the topic of today's podcast is going to be PureCycle technologies. For those of you who may not have seen some of our previous videos on PureCycle, just a quick review of what this company is all about. PureCycle is a startup that owns the rights to a new technology that basically what it does is it can recycle plastic waste into a plastic material that is much more pure and similar to virgin material than traditional recycling methods. So if you think about things like plastics that are clear, like for bottles, food safe containers, etc., those are the types of things that PureCycle's technology can theoretically produce. Now, PureCycle did not develop this technology themselves. It was actually developed by Procter & Gamble many years ago. But Procter & Gamble, even though they would theoretically obviously have a huge use case for such a technology to make all their plastic bottles for their detergents and shampoos and everything, they gave up this technology to PureCycle for a very nominal amount. I think off the top of my head is like a couple $1 million or something very, very insignificant. And the reason is likely because this technology requires extreme processing techniques and is therefore very difficult to operationalize at a commercial scale. And PureCycle has not been able to solve this problem either. And they've experienced multiple, kind of continuous operational delays and other problems over the past 10 years or so that they've had this technology. And this is translated from an investor's perspective into continuous quarterly net losses, negative free cash flow, and having to rely on capital raises to fund their cash burning operations. In 2024, they recently released their annual report. We have a continuation of their their tendency to overpromise and underdeliver. Since the beginning of their time as a public company, since they went public during kind of the peak of the SPAC mania in 2021, they've consistently made big promises of production milestones, etc., including certain cases where they've had bondholder covenants that were dependent on these production milestones, which they have missed. So they have a very deep history of making big promises and failing to meet those promises in terms of their production of their materials. Most recently, in their most recent report, they made another big promise. They said that they are expecting sales volumes with Procter & Gamble, of all companies, in the future quarters of this year to increase massively and peak at about £2.5 million in the fourth quarter of this year. And yet, we have yet to see a single quarter of them reporting any material revenue. So basically what we have here is a continuation of their history of big promises. Meanwhile, from a financial position perspective, they are in a position that is increasingly looking desperate. So as of the end of 2024, in their most recent filings, they had about $15 million of unrestricted cash and equivalents. Meanwhile, they burned about $200 million of cash in 2024 at a rate of about $50 to $75 million per quarter. And in fact, if you look at their quarterly net losses in the chart on the bottom right, you can see that they report net losses almost every single quarter. Because they generate no meaningful revenue, they almost by definition have to generate losses, and those losses are significant. The only time they had a positive net profit was in 2023, but that was an accounting technicality due to the value of their warrants. So throughout especially the later half of last year, they've been making bigger and bigger promises to investors, saying that they're on the cusp of a big breakthrough on their production, and that caused their stock to increase significantly, but um, since the end of 2024, the market has increasingly realized that these promises are unlikely to be fruitful, and the stock has continued on its downward trajectory. And so now that they have released their entire 2024 results, is a good time to take a look back and see what, if anything, has changed fundamentally and what that means for investors and short sellers going forward in 2025.
Yeah, so before we get into talking about the fourth quarter results, just a quick reminder to anybody who does not already know, we have a website called differentiatedanalytics.com where we provide, among other things, premium short selling research, where we identify the companies which we believe to be fraudulent or overvalued, and we write detailed professional grade short reports explaining our bear thesis. Actually, PureCycle is one of the subjects of a short report on a research report on differentiated analytics that we released last year. But there's many companies that we have identified that we believe are fraudulent or overvalued that we have written research reports about. There are dozens of companies, and over time we continue to identify new short selling targets and publish reports about those. So if you're interested in short selling and accessing this premium research sounds interesting to you, make sure to check out differentiatedanalytics.com. The link is in the description below. And for a limited time only, if you use the code WSM50 at checkout, you will get 50% off the cost of the subscription, which brings it down to just $10 per month, which for the value that we provide, we think is a very, very attractive price. So make sure to check out differentiatedanalytics.com. With that out of the way, let's get into let's get into the topic at hand, which is PureCycle's fourth quarter earnings results. So in the fourth quarter, PureCycle generated $0 of revenue. To date, since inception, PureCycle has never generated any revenue, and they burned $53 million of negative free cash flow. Now, at the end, oh yeah, and you can see that, since inception, PureCycle has incurred an accumulated deficit of $633 million. So this company has lost $633 million throughout its history, generated zero revenue, and now they are burning, and currently they're burning cash at a rate of $50 million per quarter. Now, at the end of the third quarter, they claimed that they had 2.5 million pounds of recycled plastic as inventory, which they would be able to sell to customers. That's what they claimed that they had at the end of the third quarter. Well, they supposedly had this 2.5 million pounds of inventory on hand, yet throughout the entire fourth quarter, they were not able to sell any of it, and they generated zero revenue. And this really goes to the problems. If you've watched our previous videos about PureCycle, the main problem they have is that the whole bull case, the original bull case of PureCycle, is that they could take polypropylene, the certain type of plastic, they had their process to recycle it, and they would be able to create recycled polypropylene that is so pure and so good that it is indistinguishable as virgin polypropylene. As it turned out, this did not happen. In fact, the recycled polypropylene, the output that they created was extremely poor quality, extremely impure, and in fact, it is so bad that now PureCycle is trying to compound it. So they take some of their recycled product, and then they have to mix it in with virgin polypropylene and other chemicals and things in order for it to be usable. So the point is that PureCycle's product is much worse quality than they had originally expected, and that's why they're having trouble selling it, which is why they generated $0 of revenue in 2024, despite the fact that they had millions of pounds of inventory on hand. Now let's look again, as Ryan alluded to earlier, PureCycle is a company that they went public all the way back in 2021, and they have been continuously making all these big promises. They always claim that they're on the verge of a big breakthrough, and they're going to have, they're about to generate a ton of revenue, and of course, nothing ever happens in reality. And so it's very important to go back and hold the company accountable and look at all of their previous projections and promises, which they have failed to deliver on. And just looking back to the third quarter, So in the third quarter of 2024, they released their investor presentation, and they said, we finally finished, we finally got our production up and running. We have all this inventory, and we are in the process of trialing the product with customers who will soon start purchasing the product from us. And specifically in the fiber segment, they claimed that they would have commercial sales. This is from an investor presentation in the third quarter of 2024. They claimed that they would have commercial sales in the fourth quarter of 2024. And in fact, they claimed that 2 producers have already approved PureCycle's product for customer applications. So if you just read that, this is very definitive. We have 2 customers already lined up, and we're going to start selling to them in the fourth quarter. Well, then the fourth quarter comes around and they have 0 revenue. So obviously it didn't work out with these 2 customers, which is yet another example of them over-promising and under-delivering. And given that they completely failed to have any revenue from the fiber, these 2 fiber customers that they were supposedly approved for, why should we believe any of their other claims when they just failed to deliver on the first claim, right? Now, moving on, and let's dig even deeper. So in the fourth quarter of 2024, they generated 0 revenue, but they claimed that they had their first meaningful purchase order in January of 2025. And the first purchase order was from a company called Drake Extrusions. And Drake Extrusions is a very small company that makes some sort of fabric or something. They have less than 500 employees. And so that's supposedly the first order they received. The first significant order they received is with this Drake Extrusion company. But then let's again look back at the third quarter of 2024. So in the third quarter of 2024, they were bragging about, oh, we have all these customers who are saying great things about us, and we're about to start selling to them. And there was this Beverly Knits company, Churchill Container, Mini Fibers, and Ray. So there were 4 different companies that they claimed they were doing trials with, and it was all very successful. And then, presumably they were about to start selling product to them. Yet they had their first meaningful order with this Drake Extrusion company, and they're no longer saying anything about Beverly Knits, Mini Fibers, and Ray. What happened to them? Just 1 quarter ago, in the third quarter, you were saying you were boasting that you have these supposed customers. Yet now, in the fourth quarter, you don't talk about them at all, and they haven't even made any orders. And then there's this Churchill Container company, and this is a very small company that has less than 200 employees, and they make these styrofoam, or not styrofoam, these plastic cups that are sold at like sports games. So it's a very, very niche thing. And they say that they have indeed launched a commercial product line. Churchill Container has indeed launched a commercial product line of their plastic commemorative cups using PureCycle's recycled plastic. But they also say that they had their first meaningful purchase order with this other company, Drake Extrusions. So does that mean that this Churchill Container product line is not even a meaningful order? Because if Drake is the first meaningful order, that would presumably imply that this Churchill, whatever order Churchill made, is not meaningful. So maybe it's a very small amount of, it's such an insignificant amount of product that they're ordering that is not even meaningful. In which case, of these 4, supposed partners that they had, that they were bragging about in Q3, none of them have even made meaningful orders. So again, over-promising and under-delivering. They claim to have all these customers and partners, and then nothing ever comes of it, and then there's no revenue. So let's move on. So basically, we just gone over, this company has 0 revenue, always over-promising and under-delivering. And throughout this entire period, since inception, they have generated 0 revenue, and they have incurred massive losses. And now this brings us to the very desperate financial position that the company finds itself in now. So as of December 31st, 2024, PureCycle only had $16 million of unrestricted cash on their balance sheet. In the fourth quarter alone, they burned $50 million of negative free cash flow. So that's $16 million of cash on hand is not even 1 quarter's worth of cash burn. It's like 1 week or like 2 weeks worth of cash burn. Okay. And in fact, it actually gets even worse. In February of 2025, they agreed to pay a $12 million legal settlement to settle a shareholder lawsuit. And that $12 million is huge for PureCycle because they only had $16 million to begin with. So clearly they were on the brink of bankruptcy. So in order to save themselves from bankruptcy, on February 5th of 2025, they sold 4.1 million new shares in a private placement to institutional investors, including Celebra Capital. Celebra Capital is PureCycle's single largest shareholder and has been a shareholder for a very long time. Even before this equity raise, Celebra owned 19% of PureCycle's outstanding shares. And by selling through this capital raise, PureCycle was able to raise $33 million. But as I just said, PureCycle burns $50 million per year. So this $33 million that they raised back in February, by now that money's probably almost gone. So they're likely going to do yet another capital raise in the near future. Now, back to talking about Celebra Capital. Celebra Capital is a hedge fund that has invested hundreds of millions of dollars into PureCycle over the years and has also lent a lot of money to PureCycle. Celebra is a relatively small hedge fund, and I believe PureCycle is their single largest position by far. Now, this it creates a situation where Celebra does not want PureCycle to go bankrupt, because if PureCycle were to go bankrupt, then Celebra, the stock price will go to zero and Celebra will have a massive loss that it has to recognize. And obviously Celebra's limited partners will not be happy about that. So it is in the interest of Celebra to basically prop up PureCycle and continue to give them more and more investment just so that they can survive, right? And then just to basically support the stock price. And because Celebra owns such a massive position in PureCycle, it would be difficult for them to dump their position, because if they are to start dumping their position because they own so many shares, they would tank the price and they would end up probably recognizing a massive loss, because when you try to sell 19% of the shares of a company on the open market, that's going to have a huge impact on the price. There's limited liquidity, so that would also be very bad. So this is just my speculation. Obviously, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes at Celebra and what their decision-making process is, but just based on the information we have available, my best hypothesis of what's going on is that Celebra is basically trapped in their PureCycle position, where their position is too big to be able to effectively sell out of it on the open market. But at the same time, they cannot let PureCycle go bankrupt, because then that would also wipe out their position. So they are stuck in this situation where they have to keep bailing out PureCycle with more and more investments, even as the company is failing operationally. So the fact that Celebra, this hedge fund, is continuing to invest money into PureCycle, I do not take that as a vote of confidence in PureCycle. I view this as basically a desperate attempt of this hedge fund trying to prop up their single largest position. And then, as Ryan explained previously, they've never generated any revenue, but they always claim to be on the verge of a big breakthrough. And they're specifically saying, okay, we have this Procter & Gamble, obviously a massive company, is currently in trials. PureCycle sent them a sample of their product, of their recycled plastic, and Procter & Gamble is testing it out, and they will decide possibly to start ordering large amounts of PureCycle's product to use in their to make the plastic containers for their various products. Now, in the fourth quarter investor presentation, PureCycle included this chart where they say, we expect that over the course of 2025, Procter & Gamble is going to massively ramp up its if these trials are successful, Procter & Gamble would massively ramp up their orders of PureCycle's product. And another thing, if you listen to the earnings call the Q4 earnings call, the CEO of PureCycle plays up their relationship with Procter and Gamble. So our relationship with Procter and Gamble is so great. Procter and Gamble has so much trust in us, and one of the reasons he says that is because PureCycle purchased the patents and the rights to use their recycling technology from Procter and Gamble. So Procter and Gamble originally developed this technology and they sold it to PureCycle for a nominal sum. I think it was like $2 million. Now, as part of that original agreement, PureCycle was required to have some various operational milestones. Like you have to build the recycling plants by this date. You have to start producing X amount of recycled plastic by Y dates, right? There were some certain operational milestones that PureCycle had to achieve in order to maintain the ownership of that patent, because it was originally Procter and Gamble's patents. Now, obviously, given what an operational disaster PureCycle has been, they have failed or are on track to fail those operational milestones. And according to the contract they originally signed with Procter and Gamble, then they would lose the rights to the patent and it would go back to Procter and Gamble. So recently, Procter and Gamble has given them a waiver saying we're getting rid of these operational milestones. PureCycle, you can just keep the patent. There's no more milestones. You just have it forever. And then PureCycle tried to play this off as, oh, this just shows that why we are so great, that Procter and Gamble has so much confidence in us that they're willing to waive these milestones and just let us have this patent forever. But I actually read this very differently, because you have to think of it from Procter and Gamble's perspective. Procter and Gamble sold the patent to PureCycle in the first place because they did not want to develop the technology themselves. They knew that this is a very difficult technology to scale up and operationalize. So they didn't want to take the risk of doing it themselves. So that's why they outsourced it, selling it to PureCycle. Now, PureCycle has been working on developing this technology for many years, and it's been a complete disaster. They've burned hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's basically a failure. And the quality of the product is way worse than expected. So given what a disaster it is, that basically discredits this technology. And Procter and Gamble sees that. They see what a dumpster fire PureCycle has become and how difficult this technology is to operationalize. So obviously, Procter and Gamble, they don't want to do that themselves. We'll let PureCycle, crush their teeth on this. And also, given that PureCycle has been such a disaster, no other company would be interested in trying this technology either. So the reason why Procter and Gamble is willing to just give up the patent and get rid of all the operational milestones is because the patent is basically useless. If PureCycle were to lose the patent, nobody else would want it, because nobody else would try to do the same thing that PureCycle has just wasted $600 million trying and failing to do, if that makes sense. And from Procter and Gamble's perspective, let's say, okay, maybe there's a 1% chance that PureCycle can pull a rabbit out of a hat and finally be able to operationalize this technology and be able to create high quality recycled plastic. Even if there's a 1% chance, well, that'll be great for Procter and Gamble, because they would then be able to buy this recycled plastic, which they would indeed be interested in. And in the 99% chance that PureCycle fails and eventually goes bankrupt, well, that's no skin off Procter and Gamble's back, because they're not putting up any money. If PureCycle is going to burn through all their investors' money, that does not cost anything to Procter and Gamble, because it's PureCycle is the one that's burning the money, not Procter and Gamble. So this whole thing with, given that the company PureCycle has failed, basically underperformed all of their previous promises and projections, and then now they are showing us this chart. Oh, see how much our sales are going to ramp up in 2025. Well, anybody can make a chart, but it's all BS, given that PureCycle has basically has such a horrible track record. And then finally, about that shareholder lawsuit that I told you about. So in February of this year, February 2025, PureCycle settled a shareholder lawsuit, and they had to pay $12 million to settle the lawsuit. So PureCycle gave a press release talking about, oh, we have, we're settling this lawsuit. But if you read through what PureCycle says, they give, it's very vague, and they give almost no information about the lawsuit and the settlement. But it's pretty clear why they don't want to talk about it, because it makes them look very bad. Now we can look at the law firm that was suing PureCycle on behalf of investors. It's called Pomerantz LLP, and they released a press release talking about the $12 million settlement that they had just won from PureCycle. So they said that, so Pomerantz alleged that PureCycle, in their proxy statements and press releases, talked about how their recycling process was proven to convert waste polypropylene into virgin polypropylene resin more cost effectively than manufacturing virgin polypropylene. In reality, the technology underlying the process was unproven and presented serious issues even at lab scale. The economics of conducting the process at commercial scale are cost prohibitive, and the process could not cost effectively utilize a broader range of feedstock than traditional recycling. Defendants further touted the PureCycle management team that claimed to have solved the previously unsolvable polypropylene recycling problem as having broad experience across plastics. In fact, they had no background in plastics recycling and previously bought 6 other early stage companies public that subsequently imploded, causing substantial investor losses. So here, in that case, they're actually talking about the SPAC promoters, because PureCycle went public through a SPAC, and they're basically saying that the promoter of the SPAC lied about a bunch of stuff. They lied about the PureCycle's management team. Oh, we got a management team for PureCycle that's super experienced and is really great. In reality, they had almost no experience, no relevant experience. And they talked about how their technology is so amazing that we can cost effectively create recycled polypropylene that is as good as virgin polypropylene. And in fact, we can do it cheaper. In reality, there was huge problems with the technology, and it was basically it's not economically viable. That's what the lawsuit alleges. Now, technically, PureCycle did not admit to guilt. They just paid $12 million to make this lawsuit go away. Now, the fact that you pay a settlement without admitting guilt, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are guilty. For example, there are, say you're some massive company like Google or Apple or whatever. They get sued all the time. And some of these lawsuits are legitimate, some of them are frivolous. And even if a lawsuit is frivolous, a company may decide, okay, we'll just pay a few $1,000,000 as a settlement just to make this go away so we don't have to deal with it. And that actually is like a normal thing that happens. But this is not the situation with PureCycle, because as we talked about earlier, PureCycle is in a desperate financial position where they only had $16 million of cash on hand as of the end of 2024. So then in February of 2025, just a couple months later, they are now agreeing to pay $12 million, which is basically all of their cash on hand, which would have bankrupted them. And that's why they desperately had to raise another $33 million from Celebra. And this is not something, when you only have $16 million left, paying $12 million from a settlement, that's a big deal. And this is a very bad look for PureCycle, because so what were their options at the time? They basically had 2 options. First option, settle for $12 million, and then this whole issue goes away, or we can go to court. And if they go to court and lose, they might have to pay a much larger amount than $12 million. But let's say that PureCycle was completely legitimate, everything they said was true, and this lawsuit was frivolous. Well, if that's the case, you should want to go to court. If I'm not guilty, I'll go to court and vindicate myself, and then I won't have to pay anything. But the fact that they indeed paid $12 million, which is a huge amount of money for them to make this lawsuit goes away, well, that makes you start to wonder, okay, well, maybe actually a lot of these allegations in the lawsuit were probably true. So there's probably a good chance that they would have lost in court. And that's why they were basically forced to pay this massive settlement. And again, we also did this in our previous video that we did about PureCycle, but I think it's very, very important, especially for this company, to look at what they have, the claims that they have made and the promises that they have made to investors over the years versus the reality of what actually happened. So back in when they did their, so they actually went public in 2021, but they published their SPAC presentation, I think in late 2020. And in their SPAC presentation, they said that they expected to start generating revenue in the first half of 2022. Well, now we're at the fourth quarter of 2024 and they still have zero revenue. In the SPAC presentation, they claimed to have 2 years worth of offtake agreements already signed. So they claimed that, we already have customers lined up. We just need to start producing the product, and then we already have the customers lined up to sell it to. In reality, as we talked about earlier, they already had millions of pounds of inventory at the end of the third quarter, yet they sold zero of it in the fourth quarter. So obviously, these offtake agreements that they previously claimed to have are BS. Either they were somehow canceled, or maybe they never even existed in the first place. But they obviously don't exist today because PureCycle is having tremendous problem trying to find customers for their product. And then they also claimed that their product would be virgin quality. The recycled output would be just as good as virgin polypropylene. In reality, we know that the quality of the product is extremely bad, and it's so bad that it has to be compounded with virgin plastic before it can even be used. And even still, they're having trouble finding customers and have generated zero revenue. And Dad, the cherry on the sundae is that they had to pay a $12 million settlement for a lawsuit of accusing them of lying about their technology. So this is a company that has basically lied about everything since they went public and has disastrously failed on all of their forecasts. And they even paid $12 million to settle a lawsuit that was accusing them of lying. So given the totality of information, how could you believe anything they say? And it's all great, to make a chart like this saying, oh, in the future we expect our sales volume to increase. Well, an elementary school kid could make a chart like this. It's just some blue bars, means nothing. Given that this company has failed at everything, why should you believe anything they say? So PureCycle, I think, is one of the companies that we've talked about the most on this channel over the past year or so, and it's really surprising to me. Like if you go on some various if you go online to various stock market forums, and I think there's even an entire Reddit page full of dedicated to PureCycle technology, which is just full of all the bag holders who own PureCycle stock, and people still believe in the company. These like retail investors, they still believe in the company, and then every time the company releases their fancy investor presentation saying, oh, we're on the verge of a big breakthrough, we're about to start generating massive revenue, this is all going to be great. Well, they've been on the verge of a big breakthrough for years, and the revenue has never showed up. So why should you believe anything that the company has to say? So that about wraps it up for everything we have to talk about PureCycle today. As always, if you have any opinions or thoughts about PureCycle, please let us know in the comment section below, and we will see you all on next week's video.